to get started. Welcome to all of you joining us here. As people continue to come on, feel free to say a quick hello from the chat box in the corner there. We're always happy to kind of have a sense of who we're talking to here as we're sort of doing this one-way Zoom conversation. Some of you have likely been part of the conversations that we've been having this past month. This is our fourth Facilitation Friday event that we've been having here at Facilitated Solutions. We've been taking 90 minutes at the end of each week and having a conversation about the ideas, concepts, and models that we get excited about on our team in our work. And these models have really shaped our practice over the past decades. So, you know, our first conversation, week one, about a month ago, was on high conflict and managing high conflict behaviors. Our second conversation was related to organizational health and how to get clarity in times of uncertainty, which we are in absolutely in terms of this time of COVID. Week three was on befriending discomfort in difficult conversations. And last week we had a conversation all about how to manage gossip in the workplace. Next week, just a bit of a teaser, surprise alert, our conversation is going to sort of take today's conversation one step further. We're going to be talking about leadership and conflict management in the Me Too era. We'll say a little bit more about that at the close of our conversation today, but wanted to just give you a heads up about that. This week, we're tackling the idea of discipline, both at work and at home. We're going to be talking about some concepts that have informed our thinking about discipline and sharing some stories from our work and also some stories from our personal home lives, etc. Everything from reprimand, reparation, recovery, reconciliation, and everything in between. I'm here this morning with my two good friends, colleagues, and business partners, David Dick and David Falk. My name's Sandy Coop-Harder. We have two core areas of service delivery at Facilitated Solutions. We help people prevent, manage, and resolve conflict in the workplace and at home. So you've got conflict, we've got you covered. In terms of just a few housekeeping logistics before we dive into the content here today, we are hoping to record this session. We're also hoping to be Facebook Live today as well. We will put recordings from the conversation today up on our website and also distribute the materials, the PowerPoint slides, and a couple of related articles through our mailing list. So if you'd like to be part of that, you can sign up on our website. We have two websites, one related to our workplace work at workplaceconflict.com and at familyconflict.com. Not .com, .ca. Workplaceconflict.ca and familyconflict.ca. Yeah, I think that sort of covers off most of our introductory remarks today. Maybe David, I'll pass it over to you, say a couple of words about yourself, and then Dave, if you want to make a couple of intro remarks, and then you can take it away.
Sounds good. Thanks, Sandy. Yeah, looking forward to the conversation today and diving in. Yesterday, I was out walking my dog and talking to my sister out on Vancouver Island, reflecting on exactly what family stories I might choose to share today. So, hey, sorry, family, we might be going there. Yeah, looking forward to it. It's been working in the field since 1990, doing conflict management work. So, Dave, over to you.
Yes, hello. My name's Dave. I've met a good number of you before. Nice to see some familiar faces out there in Zoom land, and great to have you joining us. I like Sandy's intro. You've got conflict, we've got you covered. Makes me think of Ghostbusters. We've got the tools, we've got the talents. But we know you have tools and talent too, and you're looking to add a few to your kit today and your toolbox. And we're going to be doing just that on this theme of crime and punishment. Now it had a couple of different names. One was crime and punishment, reprimands, reparation, recovery, and reconciliation. Just a wild role of ours there. And then a shorter title was from crime and punishment from reprimand to restoration at work and at home. So that's the theme we're going to explore today. And the way we propose to do that is, we've got 90 minutes. We're going to define a few of our terms and explore some of those words. We're going to share some stories along the way. We're going to define some different approaches or thinking about conflict and harm. And we're going to introduce a framework or two that might be new to you. It might be a refresher from some of you, but it's all of this stuff, as Sandy said, are models that are central to our practice. And we hope you get something out of this along the way. There's the chat box where you can note questions you may have, because we'll hopefully leave some time at the end to pick up some of those loose ends or some of those questions and have some discussion. Part of the idea here is that we just, David, Sandy, and I can have a bit of a free-flowing discussion with you folks kind of listening in. So I'm going to try to screen share here, get us going. Hopefully you can see that. There's our team that works on stuff together. But let's dive into this in terms of some of the words that I just reviewed there, and some of the words that were in the title. And I want to do this with a quick walkthrough of some of the highlights that I found by way of definitions about these words. So reprimand first. Dictionary says reprimand involves a rebuke, especially an official one, of a more official nature. It's from the Latin reprimanda, things to be held in check. I find that interesting. So reprimand is more about containment than maybe it is about resolution or healing. By the way, when I look for images online, that image that you see there came up for reprimand. I think sometimes reprimands, while they have their place, leave people feeling small under the authority of the system or parent or whoever. Reparation. So here the meaning was the making of amends for a wrong. By paying money, so it can be quite concrete and involve cash, which gets people's attention, or otherwise helping those who have been wronged. I think that's the core theme of reparation, helping those who have been wronged. From the old French, reparer, I don't know if I'm saying that right. I need my old retired colleague, Louise Pelche. Some of you remember her. She spoke French as a first language, so she'd be handy right now. But again, it's to make ready again. I found that from the old French, to make ready again. That's a little deeper in scope than just containment, right? To put a check on things held in check. Now we're talking about making something ready again. Reconciliation. This is a word we've heard a lot in Canada over the last number of years with good and understandable purpose behind it. We're talking about it at very high levels in our society, reconciliation between Indigenous peoples and non-Indigenous peoples. And I know the Truth and Reconciliation Commission said this is a 100-year journey we're starting. So that's keeping things in scope. And reconciliation is that deep kind of term that implies long-term complex work and a real commitment, but it has real payoffs too. So it's to do with the restoration of friendly relations, from the Latin reconciliare, recon meaning back, going back in some way to deal with something, and conciliare meaning bringing together. So to me, there's that healing dimension there of things coming together. I noticed online that this word peaked in usage in 1831 and hit a low in 1945. Has been making a slow comeback since then, but is not where it was at in 1832. You can find that interesting. Obviously, World War II was just ending a lot of carnage, and reconciliation was at a low right then. So I want to pick up these themes of reprimand, reparation, reconciliation, or we want to pick up these themes, and we want to talk about this in relation to 3 different thinking or approaches, or you could say philosophies. Just before I do that, I just want to give the floor an open moment here. If Sandy or Dave want to, Sandy or David want to chip in with anything that popped to mind as you were listening.
I'm good, man. Keep on rolling.
Carry on. We'll keep going.
Harley gave you enough time to take a drink.
Some of you are familiar with, yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I got my tea here. So some of you are familiar with this term retributive. Often, many of us learned about it. I first entered the field in '91. I got a job at Mediation Services. I see there's someone from there online today. Great to have you with the Zoom call. But there we talked about retributive justice. But retributive thinking can be applied to any kind of harm, violation, or conflict situation. Howard Zare, one of my grad school professors and a guy who wrote a kind of groundbreaking book called Changing Lenses way back in the day, like about 30 years ago it was published. Still a keeper, still a gooder, if you want to check that out, Changing Lenses. But he came up with 3 questions that define this approach. What rule's been broke? Who done it? What do they deserve? What rule's been broke? Who done it? What do they deserve? Many of us, I say, were raised in systems of blame and retribution or punishment. The focus is on determining blame. Blame is determined usually in terms of rule breaking. Guilt is often apportioned in all or nothing terms. You know, one party's bad, the other's the victim. Determining blame is necessary to administering pain, which is intended to deter bad behavior. Now, I'm not saying there's no place for punishment, but most of us were raised in this system, and I tend to think about it in terms of the simplest example that I came across years ago. And I don't remember who taught me this, but it's like, if you're going to summarize it, it's like, here's me and my little brother Timmy in 1973. Now, I was walking in 1973. Tim, who's 13 months younger than me, was not walking. And apparently I used to like to ride on his back, which was not approved behavior in the home. And I know my grandmother, who was into sort of charismatic spirituality at that point, actually, for those of you who don't know much about that, it's a type of Christian orientation which takes the prospect of demons very seriously. As well as angels. And she thought I was demon possessed and actually broached the topic of exorcism for me. But anyway, I was sitting on Timmy. In a sense, I was holding him down. And retributive justice says, if David hits Timmy, we got to hit David, right? So I can do it again. David hits Timmy, he's down. So now we got to punish and make David know that that's not a good thing to do. And to some extent, it's effective, right? Though it does tend to have more of a suppressive quality than a learning quality about it, right? So that's retributive thinking. Restorative thinking looks like this. Who's been hurt? Instead of what rule's been broke, it asks who's been hurt or what has been damaged in terms of operations or a team environment, in terms of effectiveness, what's been damaged. What are the person's needs who has been hurt, or what is the thing that needs repair if we have an operational or functional problem? Who's obligated to address those needs? Like, what role does each play in that? And I realize my screen's cutting this off. Oh no, there it is. What is the appropriate process to involve stakeholders in an effort to put things right? So instead of what rule's been broke, who done it, what do they deserve, it's who's been hurt, what are their needs, who's obligated to address those needs, and how are we going to go about that? Now, back to Timmy and me. This would be like saying, David hit Timmy, true story, happened. I wasn't necessarily a good boy. Anyway, Davey hit Timmy, and instead of hitting David, we're going to say it's David's obligation to make things right or somehow show care for Timmy. Instead of having 2 people down, which retributive justice can sometimes result in, the idea is we need to take responsibility. Conflict and harm represents a learning moment. So how are we going to learn from it? That's the idea behind restorative approaches. Now, before I move on to transformative, there's one more category. I want to just check in with Sandy and David, because I think you both had some illustrations of your own from childhood, just illustrating that many of us were raised in systems of blame and punishment. You both had a quick illustration of that, and I'm going to call on Sandy first.
Yeah, sure. So absolutely. When I misbehaved as a kid, I knew I was in it deep when the wooden spoon came out. So it was like the fear, right? And this is part of the value of the retributive approach. My fear of that wooden spoon was enough to snap me into shape. And the reality was my mom quickly got wise to this, right? Because sometimes she would actually go into the kitchen in her frustration, pull open the utensil drawer and just rattle around in there. And that was effective, right? So there is that notion of sort of managing behavior. It doesn't necessarily kind of get at what it was that was going on, but it absolutely is effective at kind of remediating the behavior in the moment. And that was certainly a memory that I have as a kid of how some of those that way of thinking or that paradigm I experienced that for sure.
Absolutely. My dad, he just had to kind of tug at his belt And that was a conflict suppression tool enough, because that was just kind of like the nonverbal warning indicator of behave yourself now, because you don't want the belt to come off.
Yeah, that's interesting. So it's not to say again that it never has a place. Again, back to my old professor, Howard Zare, he talked about like there is a place for retributive or punitive oriented things, make people feel a sting and they're not likely to do it again. And his illustration was, if I drive more than 50 kilometers an hour through a school zone, or 30 kilometers an hour, sorry, I will get dinged, as I did just at the beginning of the COVID social distancing. I was driving through with my son, and I was going 48 in the 30 zone, and I saw the flash, and I was like, oh boy. And sure enough, 10 days later, I got that ticket in the mail. I'm gonna have to pay it. It's $299. I support that law, and it reminded me, dude, you gotta, I'm not a fast driver, but you gotta really slow down in those school zones. And you know what? I don't need a sharing circle or a mediation or an HR person to work me through that. I just get that now. And so it's appropriate, right? My massage therapist said that he used to ask his dad for a spanking periodically because he said, I need it. That blew my mind, right? That blew my mind that someone would go looking for a spanking. But anyway, he felt that it did sometimes offer a corrective. He's a super nice guy who wants to do right by people, by the way. So many of us, maybe you can't relate to that. Restorative, so back to restorative thinking. I already talked about the hands metaphor. We're gonna try to lift each other, lift the person up. I find myself saying to my sons, Addison and Bennett, who are 14 and almost 13, Benny turns 13 in 2 weeks. These guys are 18 months apart. They love each other. And of course, they hate each other sometimes. And there's intense connection between those boys, but there's also intense fighting. And I sit down with them, and one of the questions I ask when we're recovering from things is, how can we show care for each other now? Like, what do you need in terms of showing care, which is a more restorative approach, right? We can talk more about how some of this is applied a little bit later. I don't know if, again, David or Sandy, you want to add anything quickly to your stories? No, we're good. Sandy?
Maybe just to say that, you know, you mentioned your early work in your career at Mediation Services, and certainly I was also started my career doing victim offender mediation. And that's really, I think, a really concrete example of how this kind of thinking gets operationalized in terms of trying to address these questions in a way that's meaningful for all parties. It's like both the victim, the offender, and the broader community, right? And I think that's just one great example of a way that our at least part of our system has embraced and encouraged this. I mean, certainly there's always room to grow, but I think this is a good example of that.
Yeah, there's something beyond just paying your fine. It's like this bigger question of how do we recover, and it's a we. It's not just I have to pay my fine for misbehavior. It's there is damage, there's harm being done. So how do we recover with each other? Which really, I think, also ties into this concept of resilience that's really quite taken root in our culture over the last number of years.
Excellent. So I'm going to end the screen share in just a minute here. I just want to cover a couple of things quickly here. I would just say that systems of blame and punishment, I sometimes say blame, shame and punishment even, shift with the restorative approach to thinking about systems of contribution and restoration. So from blame and punishment to contribution and restoration. Contribution being a super useful concept that we, you know, if you work with us at all, you know, we use this term a lot, because whereas blame tends to be apportioned all or nothing, a contribution can be apportioned more subtly by degrees. And if David and I have a conflict, of course we never do because we're mediators. Now, if David and I had an issue, we're not going to actually sit down and work out the percentage, but the assumption would be, even if David's only 20% responsible, because I told you I was not a nice boy, and I think he was from the beginning, and I'm 80% responsible, it's still smart for David to figure out what his 20% is. And so it's less cut and dried that way, and it allows for that kind of subtlety in terms of thinking.
Yeah, I need to
cover one other lens here. Yeah,
I need to own 100% of my 18%. There we go.
Nice. You're not even going to take 20% ownership.
100% of my 18. Oh, now I think we're down to 15.
Okay, so
and I think the key thing is
excellent.
not
I like the idea.
The percentages, right? It's just own your part, whatever that part might be.
Yeah. Thank you, David. So I want to talk about one third lens. Some of you may not have heard of this one before. It's the transformative way of thinking. The transformative lens on your camera. Instead of asking what rules and broke, who done it, what do they deserve? That's retributive. Restorative being who's been hurt, what are the needs, who's obligated to address them. This one asks these questions. Is the problem behavior observable over geographic distance and time? Is this a problem elsewhere in the community, in organizations, in society, in our nation, in the world, right? It asks that kind of level of question. So then it asks what social circumstances, structures, or possibly unconscious power dynamics are contributing to the problem. What broader measures could be undertaken from a preventative standpoint? So this really drives at that plant root image that you see there. It's digging deeper underneath the soil instead of just kind of taking out your whippersnipper and whacking the weed of the problem. It's like, let's dig it out because the weed's coming back next week. And some people might say, well, I don't have time to transform society, Dave. On the other hand, the failure to look at deeper issues means that they are likely to repeat, right? They're likely to come back at you. So here's a slide that Sandy just provided to me yesterday, actually, that talks about digging deeper. And you can see those layers of inequality, violence, poverty, injustice, mass incarceration, trauma. And it's kind of like at the top, not to beat on the medical model, because it's helpful. I've been seeing a doctor recently. He's been super helpful to me about a medical issue. So it's not that that's wrong, but if you just treat problems like, you just treat the symptoms, the transformative lens says, let's look deeper at what else might be going on. So I want to say one other thing here, what I'm going to call watchwords for leaders. And then I take a little pause again, take it off screen share and see again, Sandy and Dave, if there's anything you want to add. I call this watchwords for leaders and systems. If you're trying to respond to conflict or harm, and they're not the same thing, right? You can have conflict, differences plus tension without having harm, right? Conflict is inevitable, doing harm is not. So we sometimes say conflict is inevitable, combat is a choice, right? But regardless, when word of a conflict comes to mind or word of harms comes to mind, and sometimes it's both, there's a conflict and it's led to some harms being done. But the first watchword is listen up as a leader, as a system. I think sometimes as leaders and systems, we're moving too quickly to talking and maybe lecturing and reprimanding. So true leaders listen so that others feel safe to speak. Leaders listen so that others will speak. So that's the first watchword. Second one is prioritize safety and wellness. So as much as listening is important, as soon as you figure out what's happening, and if there are people who have been harmed or remain at risk, really that comes before anything else. Sometimes we need to make protection plans, including in the workplace, but also clearly in domestic family situations or in the community. We have to plan for safety as leaders, as systems, as organizations. The third watchword is own our stuff. So, restorative and transformative practices, both those lenses assume that for change and growth to happen, people first have to admit there's a problem. And they have to first maybe look at how they've contributed to the problem. And I've seen in my 30 years of doing this work that, and I think Sandy and David could relate, sometimes leaders really struggle to own their part of the problem, and systems struggle to own the way the system might be somewhat sick and contributing to the tension on the shop floor, in the family environment. And again, this means if you want other people to be able to look at their stuff, you got to show them how to do that. And there's nothing more powerful than a leader executing a really effective ownership piece in a leadership statement or an apology. Sandy and David told me that mea culpa that I put in there is god awful, the little picture that I have there. But I thought some visual is better than nothing, and hopefully you see the humor in it. But mea culpa means I'm going to look at my own culpability in this situation. Leaders go first, as Patrick Lencioni says. I'm saying his name wrong. I'm gonna pause at this point. I'm going to take this off screen share for a moment and just let Sandy or David pop in here if there's anything you want to add.
Yeah,
sure.
I think it's really challenging as leaders to start to peel back those layers, right? And think about, how does conflict, kind of like you say, the differences plus tension, how does that manifest in the workplace, and what part of that is either condoned or enabled by the broader system, or the role that system plays in just denying that that's happening. It's kind of like the water you swim in, and it's very difficult to kind of figure that out. I'm thinking about some of the things that have been in the news recently, right? In terms of this, we heard recently in Winnipeg about these hockey players that were online shaming women in their communications, or the whole reality of patriarchy and misogyny, and the conversations that have been uncovered through the Me Too movement, right? Or the realities of how we see systemic racism playing out in the workplace, and how our these systems that we grow up in and kind of like breathe, like the air that's around us, actually contribute to the way that we interact interpersonally with each other, in the workplace, in the family, and how our behavior is rooted in that. So how do you parse out, what is a person's contribution in relation to the contribution that the larger system plays? And I think that's really complicated. This stuff runs deep, and I think that it's really, really important to acknowledge that there is this broader system that requires, as you say, kind of this idea of transformation, at the same time as not letting people off the hook for bad behavior, right? So those are things that I think we have to hold in tension and find ways to get at meaningfully. It runs deep, and it really does require deep intervention in terms of trying to figure out a way forward, in terms of looking at this idea of the interpersonal relationship and how that's embedded in the broader context of all those systemic challenges. For sure, it's difficult.
Yeah, it is. And I think there's also some hope in that managing your own defensive behavior when you're getting critical feedback. If you have the lens to kind of dig down and realize that some of my not so great behavior is the fact that I am unconsciously rooted into some stuff that's not great, whether that is unconscious bias or prejudice or privilege, whatever, it can help you kind of have the epiphany going, oh, shoot, I was not aware of that, and able to then start course correcting. If you're able to kind of recognize and tease that stuff out, as opposed to getting this defensive posture and protecting your behavior because it represents who you are, right? So it's, I went down a rabbit hole, and I kind of wish I hadn't gone down the rabbit hole earlier, because then I would have something to, binge now. But I went down a huge rabbit hole this past winter with The Good Place. If you haven't already watched on Netflix, do yourself a favor and watch The Good Place. And not just watching it, I ended up listening to the podcast for every freaking episode that was done for every season. And what was compelling is listening to writers and actors and people who work on makeup and set design. And they talked about the tone and the culture of everything that surrounded the production. And they tapped it back down to the influence that senior leadership had, in particular, the writer-director Michael Schur, who's the guy who's behind The Good Place and The Office and Brooklyn Nine-Nine and Parks and Rec. So a number of kind of the much-watched TV over the last number of years. And they talked about how he sets an environment that welcomes diversity, that welcomes conflict. But it's not conflict that does harm. It's conflict where may the best idea win. And so you detach your ego from things, and you have that healthy difference plus tension where we're going at it and going at it hard at times so that the best idea comes forward. But that is such a liberating, different concept than, okay, we're going at it, but now I'm actually causing harm. And when you cause harm, be able to recognize, okay, what is it about how I'm speaking, how I'm engaging that's causing that harm that I need to acknowledge and own? And is it just a dumb thing I said, or is it part of the dumb thing I said is actually connected to some of those deeper levels of dysfunction from the air that we've been breathing, the groundwater that we've been drawn on for years, that we need to kind of recognize, oh yeah, there it is. I could do that. I could do better. And I could, kind of filter that out.
Yeah, thank you, both Sandy and David there. Those are compelling anecdotes or ideas, images. I love that. I can't remember everything you both said, but this piece that you just alluded towards the end, David, about the air you breathe, the ground that you walk on, and the food you ate, right? I had a good friend, Harold, who talked about his own unconscious racism. Harold wants to work very hard at these things. He is a middle-aged white man like me, but he did say, I realized at some point that it was in the molecules in my body. It was in the molecules I breathed in my upbringing in rural Manitoba, and I never really appreciated it until I started being educated. And just on that note, I'll give you a couple of simple illustrations as to what to do with the transformative piece, because it is complicated. And I want to just echo something Sandy, I think, alluded to. We're in no way saying that if you address the systemic piece, it excuses or absolves the behavior of the individual who struck out. It's both and, not either or, right? But it's just recognizing the contribution of those systems and shifting kind of from shame and blame to acknowledging sick systems and aiming for change and healing from them. And I love the word Sandy used. I think she talked about enabling. And the therapist used, sometimes systems will enable, we get enmeshed in ways that we're not even conscious of. So I did a case where, for example, it was a male-dominated industry. Of course, the particular location and industry will remain unnamed, but male-dominated. And there was a conflict between a female supervisor and one of her male direct reports, one of her underlings, as it were. And it was interesting. I truly believe that both of those people, the female supervisor and the male employee, did things to contribute, there's that word again, contribute to the problem between them. There was ongoing differences plus tension that neither of them was managing particularly well. And you could even argue that maybe the supervisor, the woman, has to have a more lead role in addressing that. However, in one meeting, the male employee had used the B word in relation to her. I don't even want to say it, but all you know what I'm talking about. It's a 5-letter word, and it's applied often to women when they're assertive or even just trying to show leadership. And it's kind of tolerated. And my experience in that situation was it took quite a bit of effort with, and frankly, we often work in pairs. So I think Sandy and I were working on that file. Maybe it was Janine and I can't quite remember, but I had to work I came alongside that man, and we talked about unconscious power dynamics, as David said. And eventually he saw his way clear to why the use of the B word was never okay. And it wasn't the same as just saying, I'm irritated at you, or you're stupid, or you're a jerk. It had a loaded genderized dimension. I don't think genderized is a word, but it's gender loaded. And he actually came to apologize to her. It took months, but he apologized. And she said it was transformative. She wrote me an email a few days later and said, "You'll never believe what happened. Only I knew what was going to happen because he and I talked about it, and he just told me he was going to do it." So I didn't say anything, but it was one of those gratifying moments. But I want to recognize what he was doing in saying the B word was accepted behavior in that field. And in fact, she even said, man, if I reacted every time I heard that word, I'd have to quit long ago. I have to put my big girl pants on. I have to grow a tough skin or armor. But I think that's not right. And I think the folks up the food chain from her were letting some of that stuff happen. One other quick example, I won't tell the whole story, just say one of my colleagues, Harley Eagle, who is an Indigenous man who now lives in BC. He worked with us for several years. He leads workshops entitled Dismantling Racism. And we've worked on files where definitely prejudice and racism is a part of what's going on. It's not the whole story, but there's disrespect in the workplace happening, and dismantling racism. Harley is such a disarming energy, those of you who've met him. He's such a soft yet gentle way, but very clear and firm. He was almost like Jedi Knight tricks. His brain, the way he could get people to come alongside and look at themselves in a non-threatening way. So I had lots to learn from Harley, but the point is dismantling racism reaches beyond performance management or progressive discipline or even mediation. It goes to something deeper. So at this point, we want to introduce another model that, again, a few of you may have seen, but I'm guessing some of you haven't seen this. So we're going to go back in here. And this is something that we call the social discipline window. I'll just say this is like a 20,000-foot view of how you can respond to conflict and harms. I think it's a super powerful framework that ties those concepts that we were talking about, restorative, retributive, transformative, to some extent into one simple, straightforward, maybe not simple, but one really powerful diagram. It adds a couple of other orientations or approaches to conflict and harms that some of you will know as neglectful and permissive. And while it holds out restoration as the ideal, it also is depicting the relationship of control on the left side, or accountability on the left side of the diagram. You see from low to high on the left side, and also support from low to high along the bottom, the horizontal line on the bottom from low to high. So if you track those two variables and ask how high is the support you bring, how high is the accountability you bring, how low, it yields these four quadrants. So I'm going to turn it over to David now to kind of walk us through with a quick definition of each of those four quadrants.
Sure, thanks, Dave. Well, every consulting group has to have at least one 2x2 chart that they use. And so this is the one that we use more than kind of any other. And so when you look down the bottom, low support and low accountability, this is a neglectful quadrant where fundamentally accountability is not happening. And in my experience, often when leaders are in this category, it's sometimes because they are burnt out and they're just doing the best that they can, and their best kind of sucks at this moment. I think back to my grade 8 and 9 English teacher. He literally read the newspaper in front of our class without telling us what to do. And so it was chaos. It was completely neglectful of his leadership duties in the class. Sometimes, though, I think people are in this category because structurally, the span of control is just beyond any sense of reasonability. So you have there's one client who's been working with recently that had 168 direct reports. And you just can't meaningfully have relationships with 168. Another person had just over 280 that they were supposed to be managing and doing performance management on. Again, you can't have meaningful relationships with 280 individuals. So the span of control sometimes causes people to be kind of negligent or not doing the accountability work. And the other kind of reason I think folks land in this is that they got into leadership because they're really good at doing the thing, whatever the thing was in their workplace. And so they got promoted to being the leader of the team. And they haven't yet made the switch from being the person who does the task to being a person who's leading the team and doing the task. So I see this particularly in a lot of kind of trade kind of work where folks are still trying to outwork their teammates and leading by example, but they're not actually providing support or accountability. They're really over-focusing on the task and neglecting the folks, neglecting the team. So that's a neglectful. Permissive, high on support, low on accountability. Hello, Canada, where we're overly nice. And this is where people do things for other people. You come in late, that's okay, I'll cover for you. You hand in something that's not great, instead of giving you feedback and clarifying the expectation and having you work on it, now I'll just fix it for you. When someone else comes in late more than once and a colleague complains to me as the supervisor about that staff person who's coming late, I make an excuse for the person who's coming late. So there's all kinds of ways that we enable less than great behavior. Our standards are coming down, and we are covering for others, speaking for them, making excuses for them. Punitive, high on the accountability, low on the support. You do what I want, and if not, I'm going to do something to you. So that's pretty self-explanatory. Some of our parenting and childhood stories fall into that pretty clearly in terms of having things done to us. And the same thing goes within the workplace in terms of folks getting written up or other kind of punitive responses to stepping and not meeting expectations, kind of stepping out of line. And lastly, you have the restorative, which is this doing things with, high on expectations and high on support. In my personal experience, those three outer rim items of doing things to or not or for, personally think those are largely our kind of operating systems, our baseline default settings for most of us in terms of when we're in stress, which one of those is kind of your go-to temptation. And the reason why I think there are kind of underlying operating systems is because I don't think many of us were, number one, raised with a restorative kind of doing things with each other lens, but also these other on the outer edge of 2, not, and 4, they're just plain simpler to do because you can do them unilaterally without engagement of the other party. I can punish you all on my own. I can neglect you all on my own. I can make an excuse or cover for you all on my own. Whereas the with category, it's messy because I need to somehow engage and work with you. So it's, by definition, I think, just more complicated, and yet it is extremely hopeful. You want to look at anything that is around recovery or restoration or transformative, there has to be this element of actually working with and getting into the complexity of the situation with folks.
So thank you, David. Super helpful. And I love these conversations because, you know, I've talked about this model probably about 100 times, and I'm still learning because I'm learning from my colleague just some different angles, some sweet spots there that I'm picking up and taking notes on. I love that observation that you can do 3 on your own, and it gets a little messier on that top right quadrant. Sandy, you were going to share a little bit of an illustration from your youth of the missing in action, neglectful. And I'm going to let you tell the story. I want to say, because I just want to recognize people often do the best with their limited resources, and it can be quite misguided, but it doesn't mean that their intention is bad. But man, the effects can be very painful. Sandy, you want to relate, you were going to relate a story here, an illustration.
Yeah, so this takes me back to when I was about 12. My parents were away on a vacation, and I was staying at my grandmother's. And it's a long, involved story, but I'll give you the highlights. So my cousin and I went with my grandmother to a church event, and we were horsing around in the churchyard, and we got ourselves into a bit of trouble in my grandmother's car, and in the process of our said horsing around, we actually significantly damaged 3 other vehicles in the church parking lot. So yeah, we were in a bit of a tight spot. My grandmother, I think, who was really trying her best to be supportive, you know, kind of took me aside. Not quite sure how I was deemed the ringleader of that particular debacle, but that's another issue. I was taken aside, and my grandmother said very gently to me, she said, you know, Sandy, I'm not going to tell your parents about this. I'm going to let you do that. And I went, gulp, okay. And so,
Sandy,
yeah.
How old were you?
I was 12. I think I was about 12. It was like 1985, I think, 1985 or 1986. And on the one hand, I was kind of relieved because I wasn't going to be outed by my grandmother. But on the other hand, I just had no idea how to have that conversation with my parents. And truth be told, I did not ever have that conversation with my parents. I think I was 32 when I told my mom about what had happened.
So fortunately, we're not doing the disclosure today online.
Yeah, no, we're not. No. And she actually didn't believe me, but that's another issue. But the reality is that I didn't know how to have that conversation with my parents. And then my grandmother and I never really talked about it again. And so in that context, like I felt so much shame about it that it actually really hurt my relationship with my grandmother, because I didn't ever want to face her. I didn't ever want to have the conversation to tell her that I never told my parents. And so it really put this really, really big chasm in our relationship that I really have a lot of regrets about. But when I look back on it with this kind of a framework, I think when I think about, you know, what a 12-year-old kid needs to be able to kind of have a conversation like that, I think she was trying to be supportive in a way, but it ended up feeling like there was nothing there for me. I needed some help to figure out how to have that conversation with my parents, and then the reality being that I just avoided both that conversation and my grandmother for the next 15 years. It wasn't really a very, very good situation.
Yeah, and so the lack of accountability, never actually checking in to say, it's one thing to say, I'm going to give you the permission to tell your parents. You have, you have the next 48 hours to do so, or following up saying, did you have that conversation? No. Like, there's so many different options that could have happened. What strikes me from your story, Sandy, is this quote that comes from a book called Fierce Conversations, where the author says that it's not like we have conversations about our relationships. Our conversations are our relationship. Like, the conversation is a relationship, and the fact that the conversation never happened, where you and your grandma never talk about this thing again, it just creates a ceiling or a limit, right? In terms of,
Absolutely.
it defines what we talk about, and what we don't talk about very much defines our relationships with each other. And I think that's true in personal life. I think that's hugely true within the workplace. So there's those people that you can easily admit a fault, or you can talk about what you don't know or where you need help, and other folks where it's shields up, walls are up, and we just don't talk about anything. And folks might be spending all day driving around in the same truck, and it's silent. And that defines their,
absolutely. And I think the other piece that strikes me, right, is that it actually does require, like you were saying, in terms of the messiness and the involvement and the engagement of kind of like, it requires, some skill and a capacity to be able to push into those hard conversations and hold somebody accountable, right?
Yeah.
And that requires time and energy and,
courage.
Absolutely. And an ability to kind of sit in the fire a little bit, which is uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable.
Well, it's vulnerable.
Yeah, absolutely. And so on the one hand, I just, for the sake of my own grandmother, who's now, I think 90, I don't know, something, 94, 95. I mean, and I love her dearly. And in fairness to her, I feel like I need to say that I don't hold her responsible for that, right? Like, like Dave is saying, like, she was doing the best that she can. And I really do believe that her intentions were absolutely good. And unfortunately, I just needed more support and accountability in that moment to kind of be able to step up and do the right thing.
Yeah.
Okay. What a story. And I've heard it before, and it's still helpful to hear it again. And it's super engaging, right? I mean, I think we all have childhood stories. I'm gonna relate a quick couple of quick anecdotes from the punitive quadrant of what that looks like. We talked about childhood, and how that manifested with me and Timmy and the wooden spoon. And David has his own story. We're gonna pass on that for now. But I want to just say my second real job ever, and some of you have heard this story, I'll be brief about it. And just in terms of our format here, my first real job after doing newspapers was working at Wendy's. I was the French fry guy, and I had to say hot, fresh fries, and I hated that. So of course my brothers came in to get fries so that they could hear me say hot, fresh fries. Kind of, let's hear it. So I quit there and I went over to Zellers, and I won't tell which Zellers it is. There were many. In fact, Zellers is for those really young people in the crowd, it's like a Kmart type operation that used to exist in Canada until a few years ago. I worked on the floor there. I worked in a whole range of areas, pets and
I'm just
plants,
wondering, Dave, when's the last time you've been in a
automotive.
Kmart?
Okay, right. They don't exist anymore either, right? But I guess we got Target. We got Target.
They don't exist either.
I don't actually like the shop. I don't like the shop. Isn't there a Target in the U.S.?
In the U.S., yeah. There we go.
North Dakota. But in any case, there was a lot of things. I mean, at 16 or 15, whatever I was, working in automotive in 1985, I did not know anything. David, you would have done better in automotive. I didn't know anything. Anyway, it was a very, at the same time, early on, I worked pretty hard. I remember getting sweaty with my little pink shirt and my blue tie. My leather blue tie is the 80s. And I was working really hard. And I was actually told by some of my older senior workers, and by that I mean Rod, who was 19, he said, Dick, you gotta slow down. You're working way too hard. You shouldn't be sweating like that. So I did. My time for the review came, and I sat down with Kevin and Mr. McLean. Mr. McLean was the manager. Kevin was my supervisor. We sat down. Kevin was a man of very few words, a very serious looking man. He seemed old to me. He was probably 32, 33. We sat down to do a performance review, and Kevin had a sheet that was full of writing. and he started to go through it, and it was all bad news for teenage David. It was all bad news. He had nothing good to say about me. And it was humiliating. It was shocking because he had never said anything to me before this. And we were at the 6-month review and basically said, if you don't improve your performance in the next 3 months, you're fired. The next month, you're going to be fired. And I still remember Mr. McLean looked at me and said, he had a big bushy mustache. He looked at me, looked at Kevin, and he said, Kevin, David must be doing something right. And Kevin very seriously looked at his list and consulted it again, you know, looking down like this. And he said, no. And then McLean said to me, listen, David, I don't know what the deal is. I know you're not a stupid kid. That's the only thing I can say for you. And that was as close as I got to a compliment that day. So what I say is I was near tears. I didn't cry because I was a boy and I didn't want to cry, but I was as close to tears as I could be. I held it together, and I was angry later. I was humiliated. And I want to say even now to this day, for a while, I absolutely hated Kevin. We went from having kind of a neutral to nothing relationship, missing an action, because I think he was down in that lower left quadrant, to he popped up to the punitive quadrant. I hated him, but I recognize now, I think Kevin was working with the resources he had. Again, I think no one had showed him how to do feedback. He looked super uncomfortable when he was delivering this. So I have to assume that's the case for many workplace leaders. And we've seen it in less dramatic terms in our process where we get called in to do workplace mediation. I'm thinking of a case Sandy and I did out of province. And it was very personal, the conflict. It had escalated to all kinds of formal reprimands. And really, we came about a year too late, we figured. And because so much damage had been done. But if they had called for help early on, it's like when you have a nagging injury, go see the physio. Don't have pain for a year until it's, you know, beyond remedy. But that's kind of, they were working from a more punitive and neglectful format there. And we certainly believed it could have been resolved more easily. So moving on then, I'm gonna leave this for now to say that I will say that I had a more positive experience of the restorative transformative realm. And I actually put, when you look at that model, I'm just gonna pop it back up here for a minute. When you look at this model, I actually put transformative up in that top right quadrant either. Because I think when you're working with people, it's the collaborative ideal. You're bringing high levels of support and high levels of accountability. There's standards you got to achieve. I'm not going to do it for you. I'm not going to get enabling for you. And at the same time, I will support you to achieve those standards. That, folks, is when people grow and learn. So that's what I get excited about. That is the transformative, not just the restorative quadrant. I had an experience of this when I first started working at Mediation Services. I was coming late to work. To make a long story shorter, my supervisor then, it was only 6 years later, do the math, I went from 15, I was 21 now. My supervisor said to me on our long ride back from Brandon, she broached with me the fact that I was coming in late. And I was initially defensive because I was working a lot of overtime. In the end, what I felt that she did that was restorative was to say, look, I hear you're working a lot of overtime and we absolutely need to address that, because if you're, you know, we haven't been giving you the time in lieu and we need to address that, you're going to get burned out. Full stop, period. We got to address that. And separate issue, I still want to talk about timeliness and at time you arrive at your desk. And folks, I was like, can I say a bad word online in Zoom? I was like, shoot, only that's not what I said. Shoot, she's got me, because those both were legitimate issues, and the way she separated them out, I was still defensive. And then she said, you know what? It's Friday. Enjoy your weekend. I don't want you to stress about this. It's not a big deal. Your performance has been excellent overall. I got no complaints. I know you're working hard and you got a ton of passion for this. It's exciting to train with you. Let's pick up the conversation on Monday. Again, I was like, darn it, but let's pick up the conversation Monday, but don't sweat it, because I think we could sort this out, right? So I thought that was a good example of holding those two quadrants together, gentle and honest at the same time, as I like to say. And I stole that from Cindy Noble from Toronto. She says a lot of leaders are good at being honest, not so good at being gentle. Others are good at being gentle, not so good at being honest. The real trick is to hold both together. I think that's true of parenting too. You know, I think that's true of any leadership role. Being honest and gentle at the same time is the challenge. David, I'd like you to talk to us a little bit about the buddy and the boss dynamic. You've alluded to it already, but just give us
I think the buddy is the overemphasis of the gentle, right? Where as a leader, you're overusing this permissive covering for people, where part of it is wanting people to like you, where some of our own insecurities, our need to be liked, gets in the way of us doing our job of holding people accountable. And others, I think we swing over to the more punitive quadrant because we are large and in charge. I had a company I started to get myself through university, where I did park maintenance contracts. And I was all of 19 years old. I had spent 1 year working in the Alpine Park as a backcountry ranger for the BC government. The next year, went to get rehired, and they had cutbacks. Privatization was coming in, and my former manager said, "Hey, have you ever considered, being a contractor?" And I hadn't, but there was another job prospect. So I formed a company to bid on park contracts. So here I'm 19 years old, running my own business, and got the northern tip of Vancouver Island, this little park called Cape Scott, as my park. And that year, across the dinner table, my financier, my dad, who helped give me a loan at least so I could get going and buy the equipment, he actually became my working partner. And so we go out to this wilderness park, 20 kilometers of slogging through rainforest to a little tiny cottage, 10 by 12 little shack with no running water, and working out of there for like 3 weeks at a time. Well, I was the boss. This was my company. I founded this thing. And the first season, I was such a prick, to put it mildly. I was bossy. And part of it is because I was insecure. I was new to this role. And even though by nature, I'm much more of a general and accommodating person, partly because my own insecurity of being in a leadership role caused me to just latch onto the power of my company. You're doing things my way. I had the experience of working in the Alpine for 2 months the previous year. So I know how to take care of wilderness parks, despite my dad having spent many more years with much more experience working with tools and working in the bush. So there's those two type of kind of dynamics where people kind of gravitate to their insecurity and either hide behind the authority of their role or hide in their desire to be relational and to be liked. And then there's those who do the combination platter, where your friends can do no wrong. So you're the buddy with the people in your team that you like, and you let them get away with all kinds of performance issues. And then those who are in your bad books, well, those are the ones that you power up and you do things to them. And those individuals, over the years that we've been doing this work, they of course are called out on favoritism issues. Or the other pendulum swing that we see often over time is where people are permissive, and they let people get away with underperformance for months, if not years. And then finally, the proverbial straw that breaks the camel's back happens, and they swing over to a punitive mode, and they try to move to formal discipline / removal. And within, especially unionized environments, the union steps in and goes, whoa, you can't do that. And rightly so, because you can't go from enabling, normalizing a behavior to now having that be a dismissible offense. You can't just make that spin overnight. So yeah, I think sometimes it's helpful to kind of think about those kind of, again, these quadrants that we often hide into or retreat into, including also that little hidey hole of neglect where sometimes we just want to disappear.
Excellent. Thank you, David. In a moment, we're going to hear a little bit more from you, David, about applying that top right quadrant. I call it the top right quadrant, or top right window pane, restorative, transformative, doing things with. I really like that. I don't think we've highlighted, maybe did already, right? Punitive, you do it 2 people. Permissive, you do it 4 people. Neglectful, you don't do it at all. You're not doing it. And with restorative, transformative, you're trying to come alongside. It's emphasizing the cooperative dynamics. So David's going to talk in a minute about how this applies to performance management or conflict. I just want to highlight that this model can be applied to a whole range of situations in the workplace or home, in the community. It can be applied certainly to differences plus tension, that is conflict. There's no rule against conflict in the world, right? That's legitimate stuff. People are going to have it. Still, we can work at it in the with frame of mind. It can also be applied to performance management, not just in the workplace, but at home. We're trying to manage our performance. I've been a little bit neglectful of my duty in the kitchen this week. My spouse is taking a restorative with approach with me, which I've been appreciative of, giving me some slack. I said, I'm going to get back here in the afternoon. I'm going to clean up this condemned zone. And she said, you better. Then she smiled. She smiled. So I know I'm still doing okay there, but that's performance management in the home and in the workplace. This with model, restorative transformative, can be applied to respectful workplace situations, to progressive discipline situations, and as Sandy already alluded to and I alluded to, in legal matters involving parties that are divorcing. Our colleagues Janine and Eleanor work in that area with specialty. Obviously in criminal justice matters, many of us cut our teeth or began working in the field in that area. And yes, people can approach even assaults or attempted assaults in a restorative or transformative mindset. I'm not saying you should have to do that. I'm just saying that's an option. So David, just illustrate a little bit of this as it relates to, I'm going to pop the feedback slide up. Is that the one that makes sense
that'd be
first,
great.
or you want to go with the volume level?
Nah, feedback, that'd be awesome. Yeah, so I think the whole idea of engaging a conversation, those core single words of with or to or for or not, if you think of like, how do you operationalize that word, and how do you have like the with influence how you engage a feedback conversation? I think the general principle that so many of us err on is that we talk way too much when we begin a conversation, and it ends up, we have the intention to have a conversation with someone, but we dominate the airtime, and it ends up being experienced as talking at or talking to an individual. And the more we talk, the more they shut down or become defensive. And so the idea with the feedback process here is to engage the other person in the conversation with you as soon as possible. And that can be as simply as you make the approach, and especially when you have leadership authority, you just showing up is noticeable because of the authority you have in your role. Most of us, again, we underappreciate our power, but our staff maybe overemphasize our power at times. But they are highly aware when the boss is walking up, where their supervisor or manager is walking up. So you literally make the approach and pause. So you walk up and you're like, hey, Sandy, how's it going? Pause. And you have to give a beat for the other person to engage with you in the conversation. Because you just showing up might be the moment where they're like, oh, it's going horribly. I totally screwed up something. I mismanaged a client call. And they own their crime. They own their behavior where they messed up without you even having to raise it. And that is such a gift, because now they have a chance to name it first. I think back to a situation that I had where I was working with Parks Canada. And I'm just so thrilled I'm working with Parks Canada because I have this background of working in parks. And so I'm just thrilled to be doing this training. And I'm also exhausted because I've been going on the road way too long. And I'm delivering this training, and I'm making up a scenario on the fly, trying to relate to the workers that are present in this session. And something came out of my mouth. I stumbled over a word, and what people heard in the room was pretty offensive. I was certainly not trying to be offensive. What they heard was not actually what I was trying to say. Doesn't matter though. What I said caused offense. I had this lovely Indigenous woman stand up and say, in the middle of the session, said, "You said what?" At which point I had this awkward moment, and we tried to clarify and all that good stuff. Well, that lunch, I was taken out for lunch by the person who hired me. He used this model. And over lunch, he's like, "How's the training going, David?" Pause. And I'm like, "Oh, it's going good, but I had a really difficult moment this morning. Did you hear about it?" And he's like, "Yeah, about 5 minutes after it happened." And it was so gracious that he, allowed me to own my own blunder, and where we could then talk with each other about it and recover and move on. But if we don't give people that beat, if we don't make the approach and then shut up for a moment, we don't provide them an on-ramp into the conversation soon enough, and we overtalk. Or as I like to think, sometimes we come in with the feedback truck and it's like beep, 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 and we dump our load of critical feedback. Thinking of your Zeller's experience where, Dave, you got dumped on with a load of criticism, and then off he goes, right? Kevin's driving away after dumping all this steaming pile on you. And it fills people with shame and with defensiveness. You're feeling hurt, are
Thank
you?
you. That was healing. That was
Healing.
healing 35 years later.
Some little salve on the old wound
I
there.
got dumped on, man.
You got dumped on. And the same thing
Yeah.
happens like when you think of in family situations, right? And so again, full disclosure, I love my dad. He's an awesome guy. He did the best he could, as he, as all of we do as kids. If you ever do something to a person where they don't feel like they deserve it being done to them, they remember those moments for life, right? And so this moment that I had, my dad had some furnace guy over, and they were dealing with the furnace, and there was soot all over the basement floor. And my dad told me to go get a broom. And as a little kid, I don't know, I was maybe like 7 at the time, or plus or minus 2 or 3 years. I'm not exactly sure. The details are a bit fuzzy, but the event is burnt in my hard brain, right? Burnt in my memory. And so I'm thinking to myself as a little kid, I don't want to get mom's good broom because I don't want to get in trouble. Because if I bring down mom's good broom and it gets covered with all this soot, I'm in trouble. And so I go searching for a broom, and I find some old ratty broom that's in our garage. And I brought it back and gave it to my dad. And that did not go down well for him. And I don't know, I probably embarrassed him. I'm not sure exactly what all happened in the interchange. But the long story short is that when everything was said and done, I was sent off to the garage to find my own spanking implement. And I remember as this little kid bawling my eyes out, hitting myself with things in the garage to see what they would feel like, going, if I give my dad this big piece of wood, I'm going to die because it's too intense. And if I give him this little flimsy thing, I'm going to die because it will be, disrespectful or whatever. And the key thing is that I felt so misunderstood because I wasn't trying to be a snot-nosed brat. I wasn't trying to be embarrassing. I was actually trying to stay out of trouble by not giving the good broom. And instead, like making the approach of going, hey, how's it going, David? Pause. And I would have said, fine, because I had no clue that I had done anything wrong. Right. And so when you make the pause, not everyone's going to confess their crime because they might not even know they've made a crime. But if they do, they're able to name it. But then if they don't name it, or if they minimize it, well, then you share your perspective. And my dad could have said, hey, son, so you brought me this ratty broom. What's up with that? And I could have then at that moment explained, well, I didn't want to get in trouble with mom. And he could have moved along a little bit further saying, don't worry about getting in trouble with mom. This broom is crap. Go get the good broom. And mischief managed. Instead of this moment where, here I am multiple decades later, still remembering this moment where I felt like I was unfairly, given a spanking, knowing that there's many other moments where I was given spankings that I don't remember because I deserve them, and those memories are gone, right? They've been lost with time. But that one, you remember it. And that's part of the challenge when we do things to people. If we overuse that response, we run the risk of damaging our relationship with folks or damaging our leadership credibility with folks. And so this idea, when you make the approach to stay in that with category, you go and you make the approach, pause. If the person doesn't, meaningfully engage the conversation, then you need to be ready to move it forward by naming the thing that they said or did. But then at that point, pause. Because at that point, now they know what you're wanting to talk about. So if I go back to my parks experience, if I had played dumb and, the head director said, hey, how are the sessions going? I said, oh, it's going pretty good. Then he could have said, hey, I heard there was a difficult moment this morning in your session. Pause. And it's important to name the event not in a way that is blaming or overly judgmental. A difficult moment versus, I heard you said something completely inappropriate this morning. Because if he had said that, I might have been tempted to defend myself, saying, no, I didn't say anything inappropriate. I was misheard, and get into some type of defense mechanism, right? So if you name the event as neutrally as possible, so the person knows that, but you're naming it in a non-inflammatory way, it gives them a chance to get on board in the conversation and owning their mistake or providing explanation or context. And if you need to, you got to get ready to describe the impact, letting people know why what they did is not cool, why it either damage was offensive personally, or how it impacted the team kind of relationally, or how it impacted the operation, just giving them that education. And at that point, if you have someone who's been holding out and they haven't been engaging with you, by the time you inform them why what they did is not cool, most people at that point, you'll elicit some type of defensive response from them. And so you allow them to have their response. and then move on to kind of exploring, making sure we got common understanding of expectations moving forward, the idea of discussing what kind of support, if any, they need from you to be able to move forward. So that idea of expectation, the vertical axis of clarity of accountability, and the horizontal axis in terms of offering of support, and pragmatic, what are you going to do next? And then following up, cycling back to them another time and place. I love your example, Dave, from your early mediation services days, where your supervisor's like, well, let's talk about this tomorrow or on Monday after the weekend, right? Where there's some type of follow-up. It's not like we have a conversation, it's done. We have conversations with each other. We keep something moving along. So that's, I think, some helpful principles to keep in mind of how to get people to engage with you in the conversation instead of talking for them or talking to them.
Absolutely. And I want to say, David, yeah, you said some lovely metaphors there that you bring on, the on-ramp. I like the on-ramp. Give them an on-ramp. Give them a way to enter the conversation. That back the truck up, dump. You know, you remind me, 2004, a little CFL trivia here. I'll be very brief. The Saskatchewan Roughriders lost a game in 2004 to the BC Lions, where their kicker missed a field goal from 18 yards out to what that would have won the game. And Ouch. He was treated when he returned home with a big dump load of some farmer dumped all their manure on his driveway. Oh. And that's a little bit how, and I'm no fan of the Roughriders, but I felt bad for that kicker that day. And I think that's sometimes how we leave our people feeling, even in the home environment when we're holding stuff and we blast. Yeah. You know, we swing wildly from permissive or neglectful up into that punitive quadrant. So those are some good stories. By the way, when my leader gave me that weekend to think about it, I went home and I vented to my spouse, and she listened to me, and how was the training out there in Brandon? And she listened patiently. And at the end, she said, oh man, yeah, you do work super hard. But at the very end, she said, I just have one other thought. I'm like, yeah, what's that? She goes, why don't you just go into work on time? This is what my spouse said to me. Why don't you just go into work on time? Then your problem would go away, she said. And I was like, okay, I'm going to say it now. Truth. Shit, she's right. And I went back on Monday, and because I have a good spouse who was coaching me, not just taking my side, it was actually useful. Got to be a little careful, because sometimes people go home and they talk to somebody who just loads them up for bear. But, you know, if you have that skill set that she had, that my supervisor had, you can kind of work with that. So I want to change I'm going to jump ahead now to adding a piece to this model. Yeah. Because
gray zones,
you know, yeah, I want to say all theories are outstanding, yet this is a quote that I read the other day, and I'm not going to get it exactly right, but I wrote it down because I couldn't find it again online, but I loved it. It said, the social discipline window as a theory is great. I'm adding that part, but the quote was, yet no social theory has yet quite managed to live up to the messiness of real life, right? Yeah. And I love that, because if you think about the social discipline window, it very clearly holds out, this is the ideal. The width quadrant is the ideal, the green stuff. And we're shooting for that high collaborative. But I want to add something now from a guy named Ron Clausen. And I'm going to combine this tool that I read about many years ago, well, 10 years ago at least. And I'm going to combine it with the social discipline window. And I'm going to dare to think we're actually creating something that's better when the two models are combined. So some of you have seen this before, some of you not. Clausen's main thing, by the way, it says Ron Clausen at the bottom of that slide, DTR. DTR is his little acronym for discipline that restores. Discipline that restores. So he's bringing those two worlds together, and he's done a lot of work in schools and challenging teachers and administration to think about the authority and power they have and how they use it for problem kids, right? And what works. He's got some brilliant writing. If you check him out online, you'll find some great stuff. So his coercion collaboration continuum, though, okay? Imagine a line running like that at the top of the page. Left side is coercion, right side is collaboration. He agrees collaboration is the ideal to shoot for. We want to be down there on the right side of the continuum as much as possible. He says we want to use the lowest levels of coercion if possible. We want to stay down here if we can. We want to intervene at the earliest point possible in the most informal way that we can. David talked about that when he was talking about the feedback model. Get in there early. If it's bugging you, don't just stick it under the pillow or turn up the radio when your car is making that wonky noise. That's ignoring the problem, right? So get in there earlier, and you can likely deal with it more informally before it metastasizes to something huge, right? Then he says, safety, though, is the first priority. There he is again, echoing those earlier comments. We have to make sure people are safe, and that preempts all the other goals, right? Yet, what Clausen does with this continuum is he says, we must admit that as a last resort, we do rely on power over. We do rely on coercion. So we might have to slide down and impose consequences on people when they're not getting the message or joining us in the with. We want them to join us in the with, but we recognize that they won't necessarily always do that. That would be an ideal world. But in the real world, sometimes we have to apply a bit of leverage, a bit of pressure. There's another piece to this in a moment, but I just want to say, yeah, that's the key piece. Reinforces collaboration, restoration, looks to use the maximum amount of collaboration, the lowest levels of coercion, maintaining safety, but still acknowledges the place for reprimand, sanction, and impose consequences as a last resort. So this brings us to the gray zones, what we've dubbed the gray zones. So we're suggesting to you that in real life, if you are a parent or a leader of any kind, and Clausen argues, be honest with yourself. You do sometimes impose as a last resort. If you're a responsible person, you would impose limits on a person. For an obvious example, if someone is acting out violently, you restrain them, or you could do it as non-violently as possible, but you're going to restrain them. And that is moving into a level of coercion. It's wise, but it needs to be done. So this is the gray area showing up. If you see it on the screen, I'm going to do it one more time. It shows up between, to, and with. That is the gray zone of imposed consequences. So how is it different than punitive? You're dipping over there. I'm going to talk about the gray zone below there in a minute, but I'm just going to visualize this. You're dipping in, but you're trying to come back as soon as possible to the with. So how does it differ? Well, it differs because we're saying as a leader or parent, you go there last to the punitive thing. You go there last as a last resort. When you do go there, you go there in what we call the 3 R's. You do it in reasonable ways. You don't overkill it because now you're pissed and you're nailing them. You know, you get that warm glow of revenge. It feels juicy. That's not reasonable. You're trying to ding them. It's like, you hurt me. Now, damn it, boy, you're going to hurt, right? And I think many of us as parents have been there at least momentarily, right?
Oh, yeah.
And hopefully we don't act on it, but we have that urge. Yeah. So you're going there reasonably. You're going there in a respectful way. So no matter what you're imposing on people, it has to be done with respect. And respect includes, I'm going to deliver the message of even the imposed consequence in a way that shows respect for them and for me and for the system or the organization. And you're going there in related ways. So the imposed consequence should in some way relate to the behavior that's the problem or the act out. So I'll give you an illustration. My 14-year-old son, when he was about 5 or 6, well, he still got a lot of what his uncle, my brother, calls, my son Addison has a lot of piss and vinegar. He's a peppy kind of guy. I don't know where he gets that, but he's a feisty guy, okay? And I'm going to honor that the apple didn't fall far from the tree. This field is a godsend for me. The fact that I work in this field is the only reason, and I mean, it's the only reason I'm still married, is because I work in this field. And I told you I have a very lovely spouse. But Addison, when he was a little guy, he'd get into fights with neighbors. He was clearly responsible in part, often more than half. And I would try to work at it in a restorative way, try to get him to talk to the other boy or talk to the person, the other girl in the situation, what happened. And there was time where he wouldn't do it. So I would say, we got to go inside then, because I don't know that you're not going to hurt another person with your words or even push them down. So we're going to have to spend the afternoon inside, and you're going to have to spend some time in your room. I want you to think about, he was not happy, but this was responsible. I thought I have to dip into that quadrant. But the other thing about this is you go to that quadrant with a standing invitation, and this is from Clausen as well, inviting the offender or the person who's acting out and currently not engaged with you in a cooperative way. You're inviting them to join you back in the with quadrant as soon as they're ready, as soon as they're ready. The final thing I say is, when you go to this punitive option, you go there with a heavy heart. And I'm going to call it imposed consequence, because I think for me, punitive is still too firmly associated with I'm lashing out, I'm hurting you because you hurt me. I'm hurting you, you hurt people, so I'm going to hurt you to show that hurting people is wrong. right? It's that kind of, and so I that's why I don't like the word punishment. I'd rather go with imposed consequences. It makes you think about why you're doing this. You do that with a heavy heart. I'm going to borrow from the German now. You don't go there with Schadenfreude. Schadenfreude is a lovely German word, means you're taking pleasure in another person's misery. Schaden is harm. Freude means joy. Taking joy in harming another is not what we're doing here. And in my view, it's the difference between a mindful practice of imposed consequences and a punitive, you know, vengeful kind of practice of it. So I'm going to pause there because I've said a whole lot.
Yeah.
Jump in.
So Dave, I get to do this like on a daily basis with my 22-year-old who is deep on the autism continuum, functionally nonverbal. Lately, Noah has been obsessed about sticks. So we go for a walk in the park, and if I just let him go free range, he will collect like literally hundreds of sticks and try to carry them all home. And it is like this compulsive energy that is really quite problematic. And then his anxiety gets going up over the right, you know, it just becomes super hard. So we're talking about, okay, we're going to go for a walk with the dogs. You're allowed picking up 4 sticks. And then we pick up the 4 sticks, and then he starts getting anxious and wound up and starting to act out. And so I think a very good principle that applies to parenting and also within the workplace is never do something to a person without first telling them what you're going to do to them if they're not working with you. And so with Noah, I'm like, Noah, you need to be calm and relaxed. If you're not calm and relaxed, I will have to take your stick. What I want to do is I want to take all the sticks and throw them in the river. But that would be me in reactive energy and just wanting to like lash out because you are driving me nuts. I can't deal with this anymore. I'm overloaded, just, but instead I got to stay measured myself. I'm like, Noah, you need to stay calm and relaxed. And so he's not calm and relaxed. I'm like, Noah, give me your stick. And he surrenders the stick to me. I'm doing something to him. Then the key thing is as soon as he is calm and relaxed, so I'm talking like, and for Noah, sometimes it's a matter of 20 seconds, or I'll put the timer on. You can, you know, in 5 minutes, if you're calm and relaxed, you get your stick back. So we're walking along, the ding goes, here you go, here's the stick back. But it's just being always inviting him to be back into the with category. Because if I just punish him, if I come down on him, I can turn the situation from a anxiety situation into a complete meltdown, violent situation. And given that he's 22 and stronger than me, I don't want to go there. And yet I still need to maintain safety for him and for us. But here's the expectation, here's the parameter. This is what I'm going to do to you if you don't work with me. Oh, you're doing it. Okay, give me the stick. Okay, you're now showing the appropriate behavior. Here's your stick back, and we're going it. Within the workplace, what drives me bonkers is when people in leadership roles take the wisdom from HR that you have to document everything, and they go from silence, being permissive about a behavior, to writing a person up. And their verbal warning has to, of course, be a documented encounter. And so they give a person a verbal warning, and then that individual gets the letter that says, this is your verbal warning, that has the stock boilerplate phrase that says, failure to work with may result in discipline up to and including termination. You all know what those little sentences say, right? And the employees who get those things feel like they've been hit with the ultimate threat of dismissal, and take on this huge kind of resentful posture. And I think it's such a better move of having the conversation with a person early about what your expectation is. And then if they're failing to engage with him, telling them what you're going to do to them before you do it. Of saying, you know what, I need you to be working with me. If you don't, I'm going to have to give you a verbal warning. And you know what that means? That means I have a formal conversation with you, not like this informal one, where you get a letter on your file that says it's a formal, warning that includes a stock phrase about other consequences. I don't want to have to go there. So work with me. What do I need? What's missing? So always giving people kind of the education of what you're going to do to before you actually do it. Because sometimes that's enough incentive for them to work with you. And other times, if you don't, you got to follow through. But then invite them back into working with you, as opposed to, I've done it, and now we're on the track of dismissal and trying to get rid of a person.
Thank you, David. I just want to say, in fairness, whenever I tell stories, especially on people, I like to mostly tell stories on myself. But when I tell stories about other people, I do want to go to the fullness of the person. So I will say, my guy, Addison, who's now 14, no longer is in that level of conflict with people in the community. Notice I said that level. he's still the feistiest guy in our family. And, you know, those are dragons you're going to learn to ride. And that's my hope for people, young people. And as a manager too, you look to help people tame their dragons, tame their energy, because once they can channel that, it's a very powerful thing if they can work with it. I do want to quickly share the gray zone of grace, and then we got to wrap this soon. So the gray zone of grace is that line between the imposed consequence was between to and with, running along that border. The gray zone of grace, you'll see that shaded area now that I've added between permissive and or doing things for people and doing things with people. So how is this different than permissive? Well, you go there deliberately and consciously versus by default or autopilot. Like some people go to permissive because it's their home setting. They're a bit of a rescuer, right? They have that sort of parenting, fathering, mothering urge to take care of their people, but they're over functioning, or they have a strong conflict avoidance imperative and they fear conflict, so they're going to take care. But if you're doing this well, you're not doing those from a compulsive place. You're being choiceful rather than having it choose you. You go there more often in extenuating circumstances or one-off. Okay, you go there because, let's say, a person who's normally not late to the workplace comes in really quite late today, and she is looking quite stressed. And you recognize she's worked here 3 years. I've never seen her come certainly significantly late. She's usually early. Once in a while, she's been a minute or two after start time. She is a good worker. Today, she was 20 minutes late. I'm not going to have the talk with her. I might do a check-in, like Dave was saying, hey, how are you doing? I've noticed, I just, you know, privately, face-saving, dignity enhancing, just saw you come in and I'm not sure how you're doing, wanted to just touch base with you. So you're going to the zone of grace, the gray zone of grace, because you recognize this person may need compassion, but you're going there with clarity again, rather than in some unconscious mode. And finally, I'm saying you go there with a timeline of when you might need to shift strategies, right? So we're not going to do this forever. You know, so-and-so might be going through a divorce, but that doesn't mean that he gets to come in late or not do his job or be distracted or on his phone all the time for the next 3 months. Like that doesn't make sense. There might be a few days of grace, but you need to make a timeline. In other words, I like to say you are camping out there in term. You are not building a house there. You are not setting up permanent residence there, setting up house. You're camping out. You're an itinerant visitor to that zone with the purpose of going back.
I think Sandy, you might even add in, you might also add in the gray zone of there might be a time you're getting ready for budget end of the year and you need to tell your team, folks, I'm slammed with administrative work. So if it's not on fire, I'm going to be neglecting you for a couple of days, and you dip into the neglectful zone because you have a legitimate short-term task that you need to tend to. So would be the third kind of gray zone.
That's great, right? So you see those arrows. There's another gray zone. Love it, David. Like I said, learning stuff. I love that because you're being deliberate about it. Yeah. And you're not making a habit of it. It's not your new lifestyle to live in neglectful, right? You're going to swing down there, and that's what those arrows are trying to communicate. So we're going to add a third gray zone with a third arrow just to confuse you further. Now, I hope it's all clear, and you can picture on the top of that little gray zones, at the far left, coercion, at the far right, cooperation. We're still shooting for that ideal. Sandy, I know we're almost out of time. I don't know if you have a quick example of using the gray zone of grace. Is there anyone that comes to mind for you?
You know what, real quick, I think with my kids for sure. Just recently they lost their grandfather, and it spun them into, you know, moments of challenge in other places, right? In terms of all of a sudden there were challenges at school and challenges with attitude, and you're like, you know what, there's a lot going on, and it is just what it is, and you just take it moment by moment, and you just apply that grace, like you say, recognizing that you don't live there forever, and it's not like that's excusing the behavior ad nauseum, right? But that there are extenuating circumstances, and you just have to work with that. Yeah. I mean, I think the reality is that we could go on and on and on with examples of of this stuff in all kinds of places. We're at 1 minute to 12 o'clock here in Winnipeg, and so I think we do need to kind of shift to wrapping up our conversation. This has been great. Certainly appreciated having all you folks join us. Next week, as I mentioned at the front end, our conversation is going to be on leadership and conflict management in the Me Too era. So really, kind of pushing into some of that stuff that we already started scratching the surface of in terms of some of this more systemic, systemic factors that impact behaviors and our understanding of what is and isn't acceptable workplace behavior, and how that connects with conflict. Where is it conflict and where is it not considered conflict, and where does that maybe breach into the realm of disrespectful workplace behavior and harm, etc., and how do you work with those kinds of challenges, particularly in the workplace. So that's just to give you a taste. We'd love to see you back here next week. Dave, you had something to add?
I just want to say quickly, as the previous slide said, welcome your feedback. I'm going to put 2 short articles, and I do mean like 1 page or less. Sandy's going to help me do that because she's my tech person. But I'm going to pop 2 short articles, one on the social discipline window, just gives a short description, and one on something that's called muscle level, or sometimes David calls it choosing the right volume when you're coming at people with feedback. Those will be available on our website. And I haven't been able to track the chat, but maybe we'll do another blog depending on what we see there, if there's chat items that we didn't get to today. So thank you. On behalf of myself, Sandy, and David, super great to see you all at this session, and we'll see you next time.
Take care.
Take care. Bye.
Bye-bye.